I'm going to start by saying something. As an Algerian, as an African, I remember as a kid watching the World Cup. There was something you couldn't explain, but we naturally support any Latin American team. It was something that we weren't taught, that we didn't learn from TV, from schools, but it was a natural instinct. You would naturally support a Latin American team. And when I grew up and I got to meet lots of Latin American people, they would say the same thing. It was a natural instinct to support an African team. And I think that when Chavez came to power, and his message towards Africa was to reinforce that thing that was lost for many years, which is the unity between the peoples of Africa and Latin America. There is something that unites us, a common struggle, a common history, a common suffering from the same people, and I think it was felt, it's palpable in both Africa and both Latin America. And Chavez is one of the few Latin American leaders who came up and said, you know, we're united, we're two peoples, we're the same, we share all this history. And when he died, the whole continent mourned his loss. It was very difficult for all of us, and I think for all of us here in the struggle, but for Africa in particular, because not only was he a friend and an ally, but he was also an inspiration. He was an inspiration because, and as a lot of you know already, and this is probably going to be touched on again, he managed in his time to reduce poverty by 50% and reduce extreme poverty by 70%. Now, when you look at the African continent, it boasts oil and gas, gold, copper, diamond. It can do the same thing, but unfortunately, Africa now, today, lacks the inspirational leader that can do what Chavez did, which was to actually rid himself of the craving that so many of our leaders have, which is to be approved by the West. He managed to shake off that desperate need to please Western countries and do what they want to do, and get our countries to do what they want us to do. So he managed in his lifetime to aid Argentina, which was crippled by the IMF. He re-triggered the notion of Latin American unity, and that's what he was telling his fellow Africans to do. You know, this is what you can do. You have the means to do it. Now, unfortunately, many in Africa still consider, you know, we still view what the Western way of doing things, Western economy, liberal economies, as the way forward. And even though we've seen time and time again that it's led us in the wrong way, towards the wrong path, we still so much craving that approval, that Western approval, that we don't dare go against the grain and do what Chavez did, which is remain faithful to his politics, continue to nurture his friendship with the unpopular leaders of the world, who are the heroic leaders of our world. He did that regardless, and when you look at Libya, for instance, he was spot on. He remained, and let's be honest, deep down there were issues. You know, he had issues with Gaddafi. The relation wasn't always plain sailing. But when Gaddafi was faced with a NATO onslaught, he was there. He was faithful. He didn't care how bad it looked. He didn't care that everyone turned against Gaddafi, and he was there, supporting him and offering his support to the Libyan people throughout. And I think that's very important. We've seen it, and even in Africa again, and this is a sort of self-criticism of both the Arab world and the African continent, of which I belong to both, is that when it came to defending a fellow leader, most of us were too scared to come up and say, well, you know what, no, he's not a tyrant, this is wrong, you shouldn't attack him. He was one of the very, very few to actually support Gaddafi. And we've seen that, obviously, I mean, the result is there, the proof is in the pudding. Libya is now a failed state, it's crippled by civil war, and this was completely predictable, because this is what happened when you accept the hand of NATO. No foreign, no Western intervention has ever been positive for any Arab or African country. It's made bad situations worse. And so his legacy, I think, for the continent is not only to try to aim for a unity between the two continents, which is very important, but it's also a lesson to rid yourself from that craving of the former colonial master, and to actually learn that you can do it on your own, and we know we can do it. Africa can do it, because Africa, as I said, it not only boasts natural resources, but it has a thriving, youthful population that wants to achieve things. Unfortunately, despite that craving, once again, it is torn between a desire to be Western friendly and African oriented, and we haven't managed that equilibrium. Chavez, on the other hand, didn't care. His main passion was first his country, his people, Latin America. You know, he was a true, the legacy of the Panama Congress was something that he felt very strongly about, and he looked towards Africa to say, you know, this is what we've managed to do. And what is striking about Chavez's legacy is that he did it in such a short time. You know, we often say that, you know, things take a long time, it takes several decades to improve situations, but he did it in the space of just over a decade. You know, the things went so fast. Unfortunately, he left us so soon, and there is still so much to do. But I think for Africa, and if we want to touch back on Africa, I mean, I'll just briefly go back to the fact that he visited the continent several times. He was very close to Libya, to Algeria, to Nigeria, to South Africa. So these are countries with which he nurtured and enjoyed incredibly close relationships. But just the one thing, a few months before he died, he couldn't attend the African Latin American Congress, which was held in February. But he sent a very moving letter, which is really etched in a lot of people's minds, especially in Africa, whereby he said, and I think again it's very striking in light of what's happening in Palestine, when we're seeing Palestinian people killed and dying, and the supposedly civilized countries remaining completely oblivious to the suffering of the Palestinians, when we're seeing the NGOs who are so quick to promote supposedly human rights, who are so quick to call certain Arab or African leaders war criminals, and yet they're failing to do that with Israel. He said something, he said, let's work for unity, because at the end of the day we will only find each other's. We will only be there for each other's. And I think that really goes to the heart of the legacy of Chavez and the importance of the relationship between Africa and Latin America. At the end of the day, let's stop looking elsewhere. We only have each other, and I think we need to work closely with each other so that we rid ourselves from the shackles of colonialism and the colonial mindset that has contributed to Africa remaining the war-torn continent that we continue to see today.